Alright, sociology students, Tree Hall here, and the purpose of this short video is to help you write your social stratification essay. Unit 1 concludes with an essay on social stratification in your community, and this is a super easy essay to write, but I thought I would give people some help, and I promise you that if you watch this video, you will come away with a solid plan of attack on your essay, and I promise that the time you spend watching this will cut the time it takes you to write this essay in half. It's really quite easy to do this. Take a look at the picture on this front slide here. They're chickens pecking, and I decided to include this in this particular essay because I keep chickens at home, and I have for years now. And one of the first things I notice about chickens, you've heard of that term pecking order. Boy, that's real when it comes to chickens, especially when they eat. I know my chickens at home have a certain order. Some chickens are more important than others, and they will rigidly enforce that. And the least important chicken gets the last. He gets to come up, or she, I should say, gets to come up and eat food last. And the most important chicken eats food first. And that is the pecking order. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about in this essay, too. So I thought it kind of applied. So anyway, let's go ahead and move to this next slide. I'll get through this as quick as possible. And again, the point is to really help you on your essay. So let's start with the topic. Write an essay analyzing how social stratification has affected your community. Consider, and again, I think this is important, your community. That's the part that can sometimes be missing in this. You're going to be talking about your hometown. Consider its effects on community institutions such as neighborhoods, schools, and jobs. Provide detailed examples to support your analysis. Your paper should be 5 paragraphs long. Follow standard essay format. Your essay must have an introduction as the first paragraph, 3 paragraphs in the body of the paper, and 1 concluding paragraph that ties your paper together. Be sure to correct spelling, grammar, and punctuation before you submit your essay to your teacher. So let's take a look at this in a little more detail. I thought the best place to begin if you're writing an essay about social stratification is let's begin with the definition. And I just got this off of Wikipedia. Social stratification is society's categorization of people into socioeconomic strata based on their occupation and income, wealth and social status, or derived power, social and political. As such, stratification is the relative social position of persons within a social group, category, geographic region, or social unit. In modern Western society, social stratification is typically distinguished as 3 social classes: the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class. In turn, each class can be subdivided into strata, e.g. the upper stratum, middle stratum, and lower stratum. Moreover, a social stratum can be formed upon the basis of kinship or caste or both. Now, that's a pretty long definition, but here's the simple of it. Social stratification means pecking order. It's the ranking system. You don't have to talk about middle, upper, and lower, although you could. That is something you could do, but generally when people talk about school, they kind of don't talk about those things, but there are other castes in school, so there's a lot of different ways you can talk about this, but the important thing is this is an essay about social stratification. In other words, the differences or the ranks of people in your particular community. Now, I've been teaching essays for about 16 years, and so this is something I like to hope I'm fairly good at, and I've kind of come up with a little bit of a system. We'll start with step 1. The very first thing to do when you're writing an essay is turn the topic into a question with a question mark. The reason this is important is because 1, it clarifies what you're going to be writing on. When you write an essay by nature is an opinionated paper. You are bringing across a certain opinion, and you have to turn the topic into a question so you know where that opinion is going to be, so it helps you to develop that opinion. Second reason that it's important to turn the topic into a question with a question mark is because your thesis statement, which generally goes down towards the bottom of that intro paragraph, has to be the 1-sentence answer to that question. So if someone asks the question, how has social stratification affected your community? And then another person said, donkeys live a long time, no one's ever seen a dead donkey, you would say, what? That does not answer the question. So it gives you a way to test your thesis statement, whether it's good or not. That's important because your entire essay revolves around that thesis statement. So that's something that you need to consider. Now, In this essay, we also have some additional stuff. Consider its effect on community institutions such as neighborhoods, schools, and jobs. Provide detailed examples. We're going to talk a little more about that later on because this is going to help us organize our essay. But the very first thing that you need to do is turn the topic into a question with a question mark. For this essay, you're going to be answering the question, how has social stratification affected your community? You might want to think about that for a second before we move on. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, this needs to be a 5-paragraph essay. So I'm just going to take a moment to talk about essays. An essay is a stylized piece of literature, which means that you have to follow the rules. It is a certain format that makes it an essay. Another stylized piece of literature is the haiku. A haiku is a poem that was developed in medieval Japan, and it has, maybe even earlier than that. A haiku has 3 lines. The first line is 5 syllabuses long, the second is 7, and then the third is 5 again. Now you can write any poem you want. You could write a 1,000-line poem if you wanted to, but if you don't follow the rules of haiku, then you can't call that a poem a haiku. An essay is the same way. It's a stylized piece of writing, and it's made up of 3 pieces. The intro paragraph, where you tell them what you're going to tell them, the body, where you tell them, and the conclusion, where you tell them what you told them. Now, you can write whatever you want out there, but if you don't have an intro, body, and conclusion, guess what? It's not actually an essay. So when you're told to write an essay, in your brain, you need to say, okay, that means I've got to have an intro, body, and conclusion. Now, let's take it a little bit further. Generally, in an essay, the intro and the conclusion are the same size. Why? Because in the intro, you tell them what you're going to tell them. In the conclusion, you retell them what you told them. If you think about it, that's kind of the same thing, and that's why generally those two things are about the same size. Also, within an essay, the body is typically 60 to 75% of the whole length of the essay. Why is that? Because that's where you're telling them. That's where the information goes. And so what happens in a long essay, a 5-paragraph essay is generally about 600 words, 500 at the smallest, 900 at the biggest, 600 words, somewhere in that. That's what I usually assign, 600-word essays. If you think about 60 to 75% of 600 words, that's about 450 words. And you will find that if you wrote that out on a single piece of paper, that's going to equal out most of one side of the paper. You have to divide that into paragraphs, into separate paragraphs. Otherwise, your reader dies when they read it. So what happens is you generally break up the body of an essay into several pieces. Within a 5-paragraph essay, we know that the intro is going to be 1, the conclusion is going to be 1 because it's the same size as the intro, so that leaves us with 3 paragraphs for main points. If you were writing a 6-paragraph essay, it would look similar but a little different to this. In your intro would be 1 paragraph, your conclusion would be 1, and you would have 4 main points. Generally within the body, what you do is you divide them into pieces that directly support your thesis. So that's how that works. That's how your essay is going to have to look. Now, let's keep going and organize this even further. Now, in our essay, we have to write an essay analyzing how social stratification has affected our community. We're already told that this is going to be a 5-paragraph essay. Now, doing a little simple math and complex math is beyond me, so we got to stick with the simple. We know we're going to have an intro conclusion, so we already know in our essay that we're going to write here, we already know what 2 of those paragraphs are going to be. Now, 5 minus 2 equals 3. That means I'm going to have 3 body paragraphs. Sometimes your body paragraphs are suggested to you within the topic, sometimes they are not. So when we look at the extra information here, we're going to be talking about social stratification in our community, and we are told in the topic that we need to discuss social stratification in our neighborhoods, in our schools, and at jobs in our community. Now, you know what's interesting? I've got to have 3 main points, and I've got to discuss social stratification in 3 different places. Can you find the 3 main points here? And I'm just saying this to illustrate. Whenever your 3 main points are given to you in the topic, you always want to use them there. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. So let's take a look at this now we're going to make this basically into the essay we're going to write. I call this thing on the right the essay map. I've spent a lot of years teaching essays, and one of the things I learned, if you can basically have like one or two words that tells you what to do in each paragraph, it is going to cut the amount of time that you have to spend writing that essay in half, if not more than that. Now, remember, we have to write about how social stratification affects our community. We also have to write how it affects our neighborhoods. Furthermore, we have to break this down into how it affects our neighborhoods, how it affects our schools, and how it affects, I put neighborhood twice, workplace is what I meant there. So just pretend you see workplace or jobs, whichever one. Now, what that means is I'm going to talk about social stratification in my community's neighborhoods in the first body paragraph, or in my first main point. I'm going to talk about social stratification in my community's schools in the second main point, and then I'm going to talk about social stratification in my community's jobs in the third main point, and there's my essay map. This is how I'm going to go. Now, I'm not going to put any neighborhood information in MP3 or in my third body paragraph because that's my jobs body paragraph. I'm not going to put any school information in my first body paragraph because that's my neighborhood paragraph. So by organizing it this way, I know where everything is going to go. Now, one other question. Why ask the topic question three ways here? Do you notice, and again, pretend that one is jobs at the end, do you notice that basically I have the topic question at the top in red, and I'm asking it three more times, almost word for word, except in place of community, I'm putting neighborhoods, schools, and jobs. Why ask the topic question in three ways here? Well, you're going to be basically discussing the same thing throughout the entire essay. The reason that we ask that question three times is because you're going to have three body paragraphs. And by answering that question in each of these, that's how you're going to unify your essay and make it basically have one point and how that social stratification is affecting your community. So just remember that each of these paragraphs basically need to answer the question in a topic specific way. So in your neighborhood paragraph, you need to talk about specifically how social stratification is affecting your neighborhoods. In your school paragraph, specifically how it's affecting your schools. And well, you get what I'm saying when we get to paragraph number 3. So let's move on. Okay, since we kind of have an idea now what the structure of our essay looks like, now we need to take a little minute to think about what we're going to do in the intro and the conclusion. Because when you actually sit down to write this thing, the first thing you're going to do is write the intro. Now, an intro paragraph is usually about 5 or 6 sentences. The body paragraphs are longer. Intro paragraph is typically about 5 or 6 sentences. Each body paragraph is about 7 or 8. Conclusion is usually about 3 to 5. You know, it's slightly shorter than the intro because you're restating what you're saying in the intro. Now, in your intro paragraph, you need to do two things. One, you need to introduce your readers to the topic, and two, you need to provide their thesis. Now remember, our thesis is how social stratification affects our community. We're missing something here though. We need to first introduce our readers to what social stratification is. You know, perfect thing to do in the intro of this paragraph, define social stratification. Talk about what it is. Look it up on Wikipedia. Paraphrase what it says there. You could even write, Wikipedia says that social stratification is, put it in quotes by the way, to make it nice, and then you talk about it. And then what you do is you transition down. In my town of blah, 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 you can see social stratification and how it plays out in our neighborhoods, in our schools, and at our jobs. Boom, you've just moved from social stratification to answering that question of how social stratification has affected your community. And you need to remember, you've got a good intro paragraph when you're ending with the thesis. You actually have an answer to that question. How has social stratification affected your community in your thesis? Even if your answer is just to kind of preview your three main points. Now, your conclusion needs to do two things. It needs to remind the readers what the topic was. So you need to go back to that definition of social stratification, and then you need to restate or remind readers what your answer to that thesis was. What did you say? How did you say it was affecting your community? And then you need to do that. And it looks slightly different than the intro, but again, it should look similar to the intro. Now, that's detail for the intro and conclusion. Let's move on to the body. Remember, in a general way, you're answering how social stratification has affected your community. Within the body paragraphs, You need to answer the question of how has social stratification affected your neighborhoods? How has it affected your schools? And I said neighborhoods again. I kept forgetting to change this. I'm so sorry, guys. How has it affected your jobs? So, with that, that's what you have to do in each body paragraph. But let's move a little further. Let's get a little more detailed. So, each body paragraph needs to be 6 or 8 sentences long. And basically, in 6 or 8 sentences, you need to answer the question. So if I'm talking about social stratification in my community schools, I need to basically come up with 6 to 8 sentences that answers how social stratification has affected my schools. And that's not too hard if you think about it, but it gets even easier. Each body paragraph needs to do two things, and I built this up. At its core, an essay is made up of two pieces, fact and opinion. And what you're doing in an essay is you're constantly relating fact and opinion. If you make an opinion, you back it up with fact. If you point out a fact, then you come back and explain it with your opinion. And what this does, if you look in the body paragraph, you can see the breakdown in the body paragraph. First of all, inside each paragraph, you need to identify and describe your topic. So first of all, start with neighborhoods. Tell me about the neighborhoods in your town. What are the nice neighborhoods? What are the bad neighborhoods? Where are they? Is the good neighborhood on the north side of town, or is it on the south side of town? Is there some of those communities have that trait? He's on the wrong side of the tracks. Is yours like that? Are the bad neighborhoods on one side of the tracks, the good ones on the other? Kind of break down your community and give me a physical description of it. Next, you need to explain the social stratification. So, are there places where the rich people live? Are there places where the poor people live? Are there different groups inside these different communities? Now, if you have 6 to 8 sentences, then that means you're going to devote 3 to 4 sentences to explaining. That's really not that hard to do, to try to just explain the layout of your town and where people live. And then 3 or 4 more sentences explaining social stratification. Okay, so generally we think that this area in town is kind of the bad area. Like, this is not the area you would go to after dark, because I've seen some people there and they're pretty scary looking and blah, 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 blah. This really isn't that hard when you break it down. Anybody can say something for 3 or 4 sentences. So you've got that. Let's move on. Oh, somehow I am missing the final slide to this. Did I do something wrong? Well, let's go back to the essay map. I thought I had this finished, but anyway, hopefully I've given you everything that you need to write this essay. Remember that you're going to have an intro paragraph that explains social stratification. Then you're going to transition down to what that's like in your town. Then your next paragraph, you're going to talk about your neighborhoods and how social stratification affects them. Then you're going to talk about your schools and how social stratification affects them. Then you're going to go through jobs in your community, how social stratification affects them. And then you're going to finish up with a conclusion. So I'm hoping that this gives you a solid plan of attack on your essay. Not sure what happened to my final slide, because I could have swore I did that. But anyway, hoping this gives you a solid plan of attack. And I'm hoping that after watching this video, you say, yeah, I think I can do this. If you need more help, please feel free to get a hold of me and I will walk you through this and I'll give you some more information. In the teacher note where I put this, I've attached the slideshow so you can get it, and I will finish this slideshow and make sure that I have no more mistakes in here. And so you'll have all that information, or you can take notes. Again, my contact information is here. Feel free to call me. Hopefully this helps you, and I'm looking forward to reading your essays. Don't forget one other thing, because I've graded a few of these already. You have to talk about your community. Don't just talk about social stratification in general. Bring it back to your town. Thank you for listening, guys. Till next time. Bye-bye.